A million protesters expected in the Dominican Republic for the Independence Day demonstrations over suspended elections. Venezuelans marched to commemorate the Caracas of 1989, the revolt which opened the way to the Bolivarian Revolution. And Bolivia's deposed president, Evo Morales, receives an honorary doctorate in Argentina. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Doris Bolo Quito, and this is From the South. We begin in the Dominican Republic, which is observing its Independence Day with mass protests before the Electoral Board demanding transparency and respect for democracy. Demonstrations have been staged outside of the electoral offices for 12 consecutive days since the municipal elections were suspended on the 16th of February. Since then, the protesters have been demanding a clear explanation of what happened on the day. Prior to today, a number of artists and other personalities called for a major protest, calling it the Trabucazo 2020, which is a reference to the same date in 1844 when the country won its independence. They say they are aiming to bring 1 million people onto the streets.
We are here because our democracy is in danger. We need to unite to liberate ourselves from this dictatorship and all impunity, where there is no government, but where all the powers, the judicial, the legislative, are not independent. They're all being held hostage. The only thing which is free is our voices and the streets. That's why we're using our voices and the streets, our powerful will that we have, all Dominicans, and we need to continue using them until the end. We will not move from this plaza until they respect our popular will.
President Danilo Medina spoke before the Congress presenting his annual administrative period report. Social organizations have not only questioned the legitimacy of the elections, but also the president's management. As he had ensured growth in the country's economy during 2010, he promised a response to the sustained protests.
The Dominican people demand and deserve a response. An acknowledgement of this magnitude cannot be left without explaining or without full explanations. Committed so that this situation becomes clear. We have given support so that the Organization of American States, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and the Inter-American Union of Electoral Organizations carried out an independent and rigorous investigation, so that they can provide the Dominican people and the international community an objective investigation to see what impeded the municipal elections from being carried out as scheduled. This has to do with a lamentable and embarrassing that brings us shame and which tarnishes Dominican democracy. Identify completely with the calls of broad sectors of Dominican society, especially the new generations in the sense that are searching to bring out the truth, all of the truth, without shortcuts or restrictions.
Our correspondent, Daisy Toussaint, is at the protest in Santo Domingo.
We are in the Plaza de la Bandera, in front of the Electoral Board on Independence Day in the Dominican Republic. The protesters have been gathering here, as they have for the last 12 days, against the members of the Supreme Electoral Board for what they are calling the Trabucazo 2020, in reference to the Trabucazo, or the big cannon shot of 1844, when the country won its independence. The organizers say they are hoping for 1 million protesters to turn out today to demand a clear explanation of what happened with the suspension of the municipal elections on the 16th of February. So they have been holding these demonstrations for 12 days, calling for the resignation of the members of the Electoral Authority, for transparency, and for guarantees that the people's will and their vote will be respected when the elections are held again on the 15th of March. The organizers have asked people to protest in a calm and peaceful way, as they have done over the past 2 weeks. Various musicians and other personalities have backed the call for this big demonstration on the anniversary of the Dominican Republic's independence. Today, President Danilo Medina has also been given his State of the Nation address. in the middle of this political crisis triggered by the suspension of the elections.
That was our correspondent Daisy Tusa with that report. We go now to live images as Venezuela is commemorating 31 years since the Caracas, when popular mass protests began in response to the neoliberal measures of President Carlos Andrés Pérez and the IMF. That social outbreak shook the country and was met by brutal army repression, leaving thousands of unarmed civilians dead, which in turn triggered a collective awareness, initiating the process of the civic-military union. The February 27, 1989 Caracazo is widely remembered as the precursor of the Bolivarian Revolution, which brought Chavez to power nearly a decade later. In Geneva, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights presented the annual report. Within the report, Michelle Bachelet spoke on the activities of her office in Venezuela, saying she valued the access and collaboration maintained with the High Commissioner's office by the Bolivarian government, and that progress had been made in the execution of the Technical Cooperation Work Plan. The High Commissioner's office also took note of the release of 14 people in the month of January, a result of the peace dialogue between the government and the opposition. Venezuela's Vice Minister of Multilateral Issues, Alexander Yanez, presented the country's response, saying the government renews its readiness to cooperate with the office of the High Commissioner.
Gracias, Presidenta.
Thank you, President. We take note of the report read out by the High Commissioner. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela reiterates its serious and quite founded questions related to the methodology used by the Office of the High Commissioner to prepare reports on country situations. Still, a lot needs to be done to have balanced reports that are based on the principles that should rule all the questions related to human rights. Despite this fact, Venezuela renews its readiness to carry out a dialogue and cooperate with the Office of the High Commissioner, Michelle Bachelet. The team of the office in Venezuela has received full support of the competent authorities of the Venezuelan state to carry out its mission with strict compliance with the principles of international law established by the United Nations Charter. Also, we have received the visit of the officials of the office based in Geneva and the regional office for South America to move in that direction. As a result, the Memorandum of Understanding and the work plan signed at the end of 2019 are strengthening cooperation and technical assistance on different issues in human rights, including the development of the second National Human Rights Plan.
Vice Minister Yanez also denounced illegal unilateral coercive measures by the United States against Conviasa, which prevent Venezuela from providing humanitarian assistance to its citizens who wish to return home.
The Venezuelan air company Conviasa is suffering from these measures, a company that has developed extraordinary work of a humanitarian nature to facilitate the return to the country of Venezuelans that decided to migrate as a result of the economic aggression against Venezuela. Also, steps taken by the United States support this hateful and illegal campaign against Venezuela, and this involves companies that trade in Venezuelan oil. It is an attempt to deprive the Venezuelan state of its main source of income with a significant impact of human rights. Once again, we denounce here in the Council the obsessive persecution carried out by the government of the United States of Venezuelan people. This is without doubt a systematic and generalized attack against civilian populations. This is a crime against humanity. To conclude, 31 years after the massacre known as the Caracas taking place in Venezuela by governments promoting neoliberal policies, the Bolivarian government ratifies its full commitment to human rights and cooperation with this Council and the Office of the High Commissioner. Human rights should not be used as a weapon to cover strategies of regime change that only lead to violence, suffering, and violation of human rights. Thank you, Madam President.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said that the UN will try to find a solution to the United States' failure to issue visas to Russian delegates. Moscow had directly asked the UN to bring the problem of non-issuance of visas to the arbitration between the US and the international organization. Now, the problems with issuing US visas have become a regular obstacle for holding events at the UN headquarters in New York. Since the 74th session of the UN General Assembly, more than 20 Russian delegates have not received US visas, including the head of Russia's delegation to the session of the UN Disarmament Commission, Konstantin Vorontsov. China, Cuba, Nicaragua, Iran, Syria, and Belarus supported Moscow's request. Speaking on Wednesday night, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro announced that the government and some opposition sectors will seek to appoint a new national electoral council that will be tasked with organizing elections for a new national assembly later this year.
Both parties intend to find consensus to appoint a new electoral council, which I totally agree with. I say I agree with this new National Assembly, with which we have had and still have major differences, appointing the new electoral council. This National Assembly that also has its own divisions and differences, but if there is a political consensus promoted by the national negotiation table, I agree, because these are signs of peace, signs of understanding among Venezuelans. So after a new electoral council is appointed, it should call for elections for the National Assembly. Then we should all go out to vote and thus resolve all political disagreements by means of the people's vote, freedom, democracy and participation.
We do have more stories coming up, including a look at Chile, where popular protests continue. So stay with us. Bolivia's former president, Evo Morales, received an honorary doctorate in Argentina. Morales traveled to Ushuaia, south of Argentina, to receive the title by the University of Tierra del Fuego. Morales, who has been living in Argentina since December 14th, was recognized by his defense of the rights of the indigenous people, his fight against poverty, and for being a political reference for Latin America. This is the 6th university in Argentina to give Morales an honorary doctorate. During the ceremony, several Argentinian leaders showed their support for Morales. Through a video conference, indigenous leader Milagros Salas said he deserved the doctorate for representing all indigenous people in Latin America and for governing the poorest in Bolivia. Tati Almeida, a founding member of the Mothers of Plaza de Mayo, said she sent strength to the president of Bolivia and she's sure justice will prevail following the coup against him.
You know the reasons why I am in Argentina. And as I just read a message from someone here that says even in asylum human rights are also being violated, they want to isolate us by now allowing us to return to Bolivia. The US told high officials in Mexico and Argentina that I cannot go back, not even close to the border. The US empire can see that we are united, organized and mobilized to change Bolivia.
This week has seen unprecedented protests at Chile's biggest music festival in Viña del Mar, and many of the musicians performing have expressed their support for the protesters. Our correspondent Paola Dragnik reports.
The protests have been continuing outside the Quinta Vergara, the historic location where the Viña del Mar Music Festival is being held. And this is despite the very heavy security that has been deployed around the site. The festival itself has become an echo chamber for the demands of Chile's protesters. Many of the stars have expressed their support for the uprising that started on the 18th of October last year. Ricky Martin, on the opening night, called on the youth to demand their rights. And the world-renowned Chilean singer Mon Laferte accused the Chilean police of being responsible for the burning of subway stations and strongly criticized their use of excessive force. She got a tremendous reception from the public. The festival will end on Friday, and another big protest has been called to coincide with the close of the festival, which has had such a big impact because of its unprecedented political content.
Turning our attention to the African continent, South African Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has delivered the 2020 budget speech. In his speech to Parliament, Mboweni announced plans to cut public sector wages in an effort to tighten government spending, much to the disappointment of Labour representatives who were against the move. Other austerity measures include requiring all government officials to travel economy class on domestic flights, and the country's foreign ministry is set to close and merge some overseas diplomatic missions, as well as reducing their staff.
Once we get the wage growth under control, we get corruption under control, we get wasteful expenditure under control, we will focus on what we need to focus on: hiring in important areas such as education, the police, and healthcare.
Well, as the annual budget speech was underway, hundreds of people gathered outside the Parliament building, protesting against high unemployment and also calling on the government not to go ahead with public service wage cuts. However, South Africa's opposition leader Julius Malema commended the new budget, describing the proposed measures as the best the government can do given the country's worsening economic situation. But Malema said he was concerned about the proposed reduction in local government spending.
Well, it is not a very bad budget under the circumstances. We welcome the establishment of the state-owned bank. We welcome the fund as well, a sovereign wealth fund, which both of them are the ideas of the EFF. We are extremely disturbed by reducing the allocation of local government, because local government is at the cold face of all government spheres.
Coming up, we look at the sustained attack against press freedom as the extradition hearing against Julian Assange in the United Kingdom continues. But first, we leave you with live images from Caracas, where the Venezuelan people are rallying in commemoration of the 31st anniversary of the 1989 Caracazo. Stay with us. Welcome back. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is once again before the Woolwich Court in southeast London for the fourth day of his extradition hearing. His defense attorney Edward Fitzgerald has so far argued that placing him in a glass box is infringing on his right to a fair trial. Now, Assange is utilizing headphones but is unable to hear the proceedings properly or consult with his attorneys. The WikiLeaks founder is facing extradition to the U.S. for releasing documents in 2010 which exposed Washington's war crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, seen by many as an attack on the free press.
Firstly, after the break, they'll be giving evidence, well, not evidence, but case law as to why it is acceptable for Julian to sit with his lawyers. Now, we've been since this request came in yesterday, we've been inundated with examples of where people have been allowed out of the dock to sit with their lawyers so that they can confer with their lawyers, so that their communications with them are legally privileged. One very good example is Clive Ponting, who's the British equivalent of Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers. During his trial, he was, after the first day, was allowed to sit next to his lawyers, and for the remainder of his trial. Just before the break, they also spoke briefly about the anonymous witnesses that will be presented in court in May. And they were trying to hammer out an agreement, because the idea is that they're anonymous witnesses, but how far should they be shared with the prosecution? Remember that the prosecution, or their client, is not just a person, it's an entire government. And we've seen that this is a very political in nature prosecution. These anonymous witnesses are whistleblowers from the Spanish case, which exposed all the spying on Mr. Assange. And so there needs to be an agreement as to whether the whole Department of Justice or the unnamed embassy officials sitting in the court get to find out who these people are. It would be outrageous, and it would certainly open those witnesses up to political persecution.
For more, our correspondent Pablo Navarrete reports from London on Assange's case.
Here outside the Woolwich Crown Court, it's day 4 of the Julian Assange extradition trial. It was set for 5 days, but there are reports that it will be ending early today. Now, this is the trial that will initiate to see whether Julian Assange will be extradited to the US to face 18 charges, including espionage, which would mean that he could face up to 175 years in prison. As we know, in April, he was arrested by the British police from the Ecuadorian embassy, where he had been given a political assignment initially by the Rafael Correa government, but under Lenin Moreno, the current president of Ecuador, this was rescinded and he was effectively expelled from the embassy and has been held next door here at the Belmarsh High Security prison. We've heard from his lawyers how on the first day of the trial he was handcuffed 11 times, strip searched twice, and there have been grave concerns about his treatment whilst in Belmarsh, and also a lot of criticism of the behaviour of the judge and in general the legal process up to now by the British state. So this is day 4 of the extradition trial for Julian Assange to determine whether he will be extradited to the US to face charges of espionage for releasing classified US government material.
U.S. President Donald Trump has appointed Vice President Mike Pence to oversee efforts to prevent a widespread coronavirus outbreak in the United States.
What I've done is I'm going to be announcing exactly right now that I'm going to be putting our Vice President Mike Pence in charge. And Mike will be working with the professionals and doctors and everybody else that's working.
The African Union, along with various regional health organizations, have decided to hold a series of workshops to train health workers across the continent to respond to the novel coronavirus outbreak. In preparation against the possible outbreak, 35 member states from the African Union sent their representatives to the training in Abuja, Nigeria. The training workshop was the first of its kind by the African Union in collaboration with other international partners, including the World Health Organization and the African Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
WHO, Afro, WHO, EMBO, Africa CDC, West African Health Organization, we all come together, to decide on how best to approach this situation, share information. And of course, we should not forget that politically too, our officials, the decision makers have also seen the need to invest in health.
If this virus is going to enter any country, it is going to come through a point of entry. It is going to fly in or come in via ship or come in via a road border, a land border. And therefore, if we have people who are vigilant, who are trained, who have a high index of suspicion, that is our first barrier that we have erected. Then the second part is, if somebody becomes sick with the coronavirus, he will either be sick in his community and remain in his community, or he will show up in a health facility. And if you notice, most disease outbreaks are amplified around health facilities.
And that brings us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on Starsat channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And join us on social media. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.